take this. All right. So, the first place I ever said goodbye to Annie Wright was on that park bench right over there. And this was a person that I met by way of GDC. It was my first GDC ever. She was another. I'm a journalist, by the way. I write for Second Rock Paper Shotgun at this point. I was freelance back then. She was another journalist, and it was just a person that I met that I had a lot in common with. And it was really cool, and we got along well, and we ended up staying in touch. And at the time, for me, took on sort of vaguely romantic significance. But I was like 20. I was an idiot. And so yeah. She was a really, really good and positive influence in my life, especially at a point where I was just getting out of college and I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was really afraid of the world and really just doing anything. I was living in Texas at the time, and it was just kind of terrible because of Texas. And so, yeah, let's see. Why did my notes decide to mix themselves up? That is not helpful. Be important. 2 moments, technical difficulties, as if that hasn't already happened with this talk. But yeah, so she ended up becoming a very good friend of mine, and I even I visited her in her hometown a couple times. I walked her dog for her while she was sick. She had a really awesome dog named Gretch, who was really adorable and just great. And so, yeah, in that time I got to know her as someone who was very determined to do what she wanted to do in life. At the time she was a journalist, and I even did some work for her. But ultimately she wanted to actually go to Norway and study, because she was very in touch with that element of her own history and culture. And she was into Viking stuff, but authentic Viking, not our stereotypical, horn hats and long ships and all of that bullshit. But she ended up working at 343 Industries, which is, they make Halo. And among other things, they became a really powerful force for good, in part because of her influence and a bunch of other great people there, in terms of just helping online communities be better. They actually instituted a policy where if there was sexism in Halo 4, people just got banned. Go away. And yeah, so she was a really amazing person. And she passed away earlier this year. In February. I got the news while I was at DICE, of all places. And that was really shocking to me. And, because it just came out of nowhere. And I didn't take it well at the time. I went out with some friends, and because I didn't know what else to do, and I got really drunk, and bad stuff happened, and I punched a karaoke bar. And so that just it was a lot at once, because Annie meant a lot to me, a whole lot. She changed my life at a very formative phase, and I thought about her frequently, but we sort of fell out of touch over time. And so it was one of those things where you appreciate someone a whole lot, and you're always man, I'm going to tell them that someday, and then you never get around to it, and it just doesn't happen, and you wake up and they're gone. And I don't know, it was strange, because these gaming communities that we have, they exist online all the time. So it always feels like you're kind of close to people, kind of vaguely, and you always feel kind of in touch with them, but maybe not entirely. And so there was this slow, gradual distance that formed. I remember one time she said something to the extent of that she felt like I was a younger, less wizened version of herself, which was what I needed to hear at the time, because I was well, you turned out great. You're really brave and awesome, and you're just going to, go take life by the horns and do whatever you want. But, that distance makes you feel less that way. And I guess, the takeaway from it is, even though we do exist in this infinitely connected world, take the time out to deal with individual people and, tell them what they mean. Because, they don't know it. They don't know, and they may never have a chance to find out unless you, just take them by the arm and say, hey, you're important to me. I care about you, or even I love you. And so, yeah, I mean, here's the thing that I wrote down. Games bring us together, but it's up to us to keep it that way. Value people above all else, and don't be afraid, because that's the other thing. It's terrifying to tell someone what they mean to you, but do it. Say what you mean, do what you really want, and just fucking go for it. And that's actually one of the biggest lessons I took away from knowing Annie, to the point where my phone background is a thing she tweeted. It's, I will greet enthusiastically whatever the universe throws at me with a cheeky smile and 2 middle fingers. And hashtag, bring it. So that's my talk.
Thank you, Nathan. Next up is Jay Girls. So give it up for Jay Girls. Hi. Right. I'm Jake, and this is my tool-assisted last levels talk. The tool in question is this notebook, in which I have some notes. But I'm here to talk about tool-assisted speed runs and why those might be interesting to some of you if you've never heard of them. So I'm going to assume that many of you haven't, so I will start with a brief description of what a tool-assisted speed run is. To make a tool-assisted speed run of a game, you first must choose a game which is on an emulatable console. There are also some tools for simple Windows games. But the most common thing would be, say, the NES. So you have an NES emulator, and then you modify the emulator to have more powers than the NES had. For instance, you can advance the game state 1 frame at a time. You can save the entire state of the emulator and return to it at any time in order to create a sequence of play that is exactly what you want. And the general goal of a tool-assisted speedrun is to complete the game as fast as theoretically possible. So like a superhuman, 1 frame jumps, everything absolutely precise. Many of you may have encountered a tool-assisted speedrun for the first time in 2003 with Morimoto's Super Mario Bros. 3 run in 11 minutes. This got very popular, went viral. People didn't really know what's going on. They were like, how is this person possibly so good at this game? A lot of people thought they were cheating, but it got a lot of exposure. Let's see. So another thing you can do in tool-assisted speedruns is you have full access to the state of memory of the console. So you can, for instance, identify which memory address has, say, Mario's X position or his velocity, and you can then try to optimize that value by going over and over again and trying different input combinations. But always only using the original tools that are available to the console, like only pressing the 8 buttons on the NES controller. There is a website, tasvideos.org, which is the premier hub of all things TAS videos, and I strongly encourage all of you who are interested to check it out after this talk. So, why do people do this? There are a number of different reasons. The most straightforward is it's a fun puzzle, it's a challenge. You're confronted with a game you like and you just think, what's the possibly fastest this could ever be done? And you try it out. But I think there's a lot more to it than that. Another big aspect is the community aspect. TAS Videos is a huge and really remarkable community. There is strong competition between people to improve each other's runs and build on each other's runs. And it's also one of the most international online gaming communities I've ever been a part of. There's forums in subforums in many different languages. I've communicated with TASers from Russia, from China, there's a big community in Japan, and from South America, all over the place. People are just coming together to work together on, and there is competition, but it's all in the spirit of working together towards perfecting a game, towards pushing it to the absolute furthest limits. And it's just actually this year, I believe, TAS Videos, or last year, celebrated its 10th anniversary as a community, and there are still people from the community who've been there that whole time, just producing this work and working together, and it's really pretty amazing. But even more than that, I think what draws individuals to TASing is that it's one of the deepest ways you can intimately connect with a game that you love. If there's a game that is what you are, you just want, that game speaks to you, you grew up on it in some way, it is really important to you personally. There is no way to learn a game in and out more fully than to spend months possibly of your life exploring every aspect of it, learning how the random number generator works, learning how all the AI interacts with you, and just testing everything, working with other people who also love the game as much as you do, to all work towards a common goal. So that is some of why TASing happens. But another thing I want to talk about here is how any of this might be relevant to people who don't want to TAS, because honestly it is an extremely esoteric, time-consuming, and pretty weird pastime. This is something that people sit around doing for, in some cases, literally multiple years. There was a 100%, which is a much contested definition, but a 100% completion of Chrono Trigger run that I believe was in progress for 5 years and is like 4 hours long with every single frame optimized. People get really crazy with this stuff, and it is very impressive. Another thing to note at this point might be that original 10-minute, or about 10-minute Super Mario Bros. 3 run has recently been improved to 3 minutes via the discovery of an insane memory corruption glitch, which you should all watch. Anyway, I've been informed it's only 1 minute, so why should you care about any of this? How does TASing affect the broader games community? One, TASing has a direct impact on the speedrunning community. If you've ever watched anyone speedrun Ocarina of Time, that strategy was discovered by TASers. Also, the 3-minute Mario run has also been re-implemented by real-time speedrunners. There's also some TAS-like techniques that can show up in gameplay. For instance, Half-Life runners often allow themselves to use macro scripts or save states within an actual speedrun. There's another Flash game that I've seen called Broken Robot Love, which actually incorporates the idea of emulator slowdown into gameplay. It's one of the most fascinating instances of this I've ever seen, so that you're actually trying to complete a level quickly while using slowdown, which both impacts your time, as in it makes it worse, but it also lets you do more precise, more controlled things. And you may have also heard of a game called ROM Check Fail, which is, I think, strongly inspired by the kinds of glitching and corruption that has happened when you're playing around with emulators. And I'm sure the author was familiar with tool-assisted speedrunning. It just shines through. And lastly, also, I just wanted to mention some possibilities for interactive art. There's something called Super Mario Space-Time Organ by Chris Novello, in which this person hooked up a keyboard, like a xylophone keyboard, to different emulator functions, and just like by running their finger across it, like loaded different states and corrupted memory in different ways, and it's really beautiful. So I think there's a ton of possibilities in tool-assisted speedrunning, and you should all check it out and get inspired. That's my talk.
Thank you, Jake. Next up is Chad Toprak. Is Chad Toprak here? I mean, I told him to be here, but I guess he's not. So next up is David Rico then. Yay!
Alright guys, my name's David Rico. I'm here, it's my first GDC here, so I'm glad to be here. Just kind of raise your hand if it's your first GDC. Anyone? Alright, well, nice to see you guys. We'll get together later and just cry. Anyways, I want to talk to you guys about procedural generation and why it's awesome for indie games, especially indie gamers alike. First of all, there's a lot of positives to procedural generation. You get a lot of variety. You can create a lot of content with having a lot, less hands involved. So it takes a lot less work to do this stuff. You also get a lot more gameplay possibilities. You can, pretty much, you can have one guy create this like really complex, really in-depth game, and just have them design this game. It takes very little time to do it. You design like little individual rooms, compartmentalize, and it comes out great. Look at games like Bind of Isaac, Rogue Legacy, things like that. There's a lot of roguelike indie games and lots of procedurally generated indie games because it's such a powerful approach to producing content in such a short amount of time and effort. And one thing I kind of want to bring up is that, you think procedural generation and you immediately think roguelike and some sort of like top-down platformer or like action-adventure sort of game, right? I mean, that's sort of what you see all the time. But you don't really have to sort of put things in that mold. It doesn't all have to fit in there. I really don't see why you can't have something like a roguelike, like a procedure-generated adventure game, for example. How many of you guys have seen the movie Cube? Where they have like, basically the idea is you have these series of rooms that each have like these deadly puzzles and things that you have to solve to get through the next room. That's a great premise for some sort of like procedurally generated adventure game. I want to see someone make that. it's so easy, it's so ripe for the taking, and it would be so awesome to experience, and it provides so much variety of gameplay. One thing though that I do want to say is that there's also a reason why there's not procedurally generated games out there. Every game doesn't have it. There's some negatives to that. For example, it's a little harder to tell a story when you don't know what the player is going to see next, right? You can do it, but it's going to take a lot of work, like a lot of work. And just some games, just the style doesn't really fit into that, Some games thrive on the sense of having a visual, very beautiful world, a great aesthetic, or some sort of story, or a very linear path, and that's fine, you don't have to make everything procedural. But you should think about whether you can put that in your game, whether it's a linear game, you can still have certain procedural elements, keep things fresh, keep things dynamic. It's another negative is that you lose a little bit of control over your style. So because the computer is basically sort of deciding what the player is going to get, sometimes you don't get to have your hand in and say, no, I want the player to see this thing specifically. I want them to look at this painting or this, this person. I want them to interact with this. You're not always going to get that control over the content. And then finally, there's a lot of unexpected hurdles that you're gonna face when you're dealing with procedural generation and content in general. Off the top of my head, I use Unity for my game. I'm very into procedural generation. I made some horror games. They're all procedurally generated. Working on another one now. And one of the big hurdles is that a lot of these engines are just not built for this sort of content. They're just not. Unity does not have, for example, occlusion to handle rendering things that are procedurally generated. Lighting is not set up. So you're going to have to get your hands dirty with some of them to really be able to crank out the kind of quality content that your players deserve. But don't let that dissuade you, If you have a 2D platformer, things are a lot easier if it's procedurally generated. If you have a 3D game, things are harder, come talk to me, and maybe I can share some tips, because I've gone through the growing pains. It's a huge pain, but it's definitely worth it, and it's tons of fun to make these games. You as a creator are going to be surprised by your own game sometimes, with the kind of content that will come up. And that's a beautiful thing, because you can play through your game 100 times and be sick of it. But sometimes you're going to find that there's this thing that you don't even remember making, and you start wondering whether the machine actually created this room for you, and it's trying to freak you out. So that's my talk. I'll use the rest of the time just to answer questions if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask. Any questions? Comments? All right. Well, if you guys want to talk about it, please find me after. I'd love to chat with you guys about it. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Toprak. I'm from Melbourne, Australia, and I co-direct and curate a local indie games party gathering thing called Buckenham. And today I want to talk to you all about local multiplayer games. So I actually don't know where to start. I'm going to start all the way back in the 70s and 80s when video game arcades were a thing, and people would gather around these public communal spaces, around these machines, and play together and be around each other. And there'd be a lot of interaction between not only friends but strangers as well. But somewhere in time we kind of lost that. It was probably some point during the introduction of home consoles and the home becoming the center of gathering. But in the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen the rise of, or the return of local multiplayer games, especially within the indie scene. Hands up who has played at least one local multiplayer game at some point during GDC. Yeah, so there's like a whole bunch of you. So it's really exciting that we now have these games where we can play around each other in lots of different ways. Some local multiplayer games are kind of physical, like Jazz Joust. Others you stand around a screen, and there's like all sorts of really exciting stuff happening. So it's really exciting times. There are groups coming out like Wild Rumpus or Baby Castles, or in Melbourne, Australia, we have Hobble Garden, and we're starting to create these events either in gallery settings bar or club settings, or even in open public settings, where we bring people together and allow them to play these games with and around each other. So it's become a lot more diverse in the sense that we're now showing these really interesting and diverse, just like totally weird games. But I feel if we were to be a little more critical about it, I think we can do a lot better in trying to make these events a little more diverse and open to a broader community. I still feel as though a lot of these events, we're just inviting like fellow developers, fellow friends, and not much of the general public. Like the people who are coming to these events are people who are already playing these games. What I'd like to see is inviting like the general public to come and play along, for them to be exposed to how wonderful and fun and amazing these games are. So I'd like to see a lot more of these events happen in open public spaces, just like boss levels. I feel that's like really important for people to just be exposed to what's happening, what's exciting in video game culture. Another thing is a lot of these groups that are curating these events, like Wild Rumpus, Olive Garden, Lady Castles, bear a lot of responsibility in the games that we showcase and decide to pick and curate, because I feel the games that we're showcasing are not only influencing video game culture, like the games that we're playing and the games that we're talking about, but also game design culture, because the games that we're seeing at these events are actually influencing the types of games that we're making. I don't know how many of you guys are kind of excited about making or wanting to make local multiplayer games, but as a curator myself, a lot of the games that are submitted to us are very similar to the ones that we've showcased in the past. Games like Samurai Gun and Towerfall and Star Wars are all great, but what I'd like to see as a curator is a more diverse, a more broad range of games. Like just there are like really great games out there, and I just like to see more games that are doing something different and aren't just skin on existing games. So for all you people out there who are wanting to make local multiplayer games, I'd encourage you all to try and make something different, something that hasn't been done before. So I'd encourage experimentation. And I guess the final thing that I want to talk about is, if you guys don't have a local multiplayer game or indie game gathering in your local community, in your local city, like if Wild Rumpus or Lady Castles doesn't exist, don't wait for anyone to come and make it. Just make it happen yourself. Bring people together, source controllers or laptops from your friends, and just pick a spot in the city, like in a garden or in a cafe or something, and just bring people together and expose your local like community to some great games. And yeah, I think that's it. Great, thank you. I think I have a few minutes to spare. Does anyone have any questions about local multiplayer games or like the design, the curation, and culture surrounding them? No?
What's a good way to approach something like play? That's all.
Okay, so the question was, how do you approach someone who has a space that you want to use for like a party or something? I think the best way is just really be upfront about it. Tell them how excited you are about contributing to video game culture. That it's something that's happening now. It's happening today, and it's exciting for them to be a part of as well, because it's happening all around the world. Like Wild Rumpus recently hosted their fancy video game party at the Art Gallery of Ontario, which is like the biggest art gallery in Canada. And there's like so many exciting other spaces that are opening their arms and inviting people to just make stuff. So I think just approach them and giving examples of what's already being made around the world, and telling them that you want to make something. I think it's great. Cool. Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Alright. Yes, welcome. Thank you. Okay, so I actually didn't think think I was going to be doing this talk, so forgive me if it's kind of haphazard. I've been frantically typing up like different points. So my talk's called "Cool Guys Don't Look Explosions," and I wanted to discuss masculinity in games and the way that it's marketed, like on the box art. So you guys have seen covers like Battlefield, Watch Dogs, Bioshock Infinite, Resident Evil 4, like all the same sort of cover where it's like some like scruffy white dude and he has like a gun in his hand and he's kind of like looking off into the distance, like I can't even be bothered to like look at the viewer and there's like chaos happening behind him. So you see that a lot. And as a disclaimer, I want to say that everyone wants to feel like a badass when they're playing that kind of character. Everyone wants to like go home after a long day and just be like crazy and not look at explosions that you create, or like do a 52 car pile up in Grand Theft Auto and be like, yeah, I just did that. I'm so awesome. So I think those are really cool, but we're seeing it over and over and over again, and I want to see more variation. So I see some variation in like male bodies, but usually it's like really buffed up, or like at least like lean and muscular. And I think there should be more variation. There should be like, you don't see any like chubby dudes on the cover unless we're like making fun of them. There should be more like real male bodies on covers of male characters, and like feminine male bodies. Like you don't really see that. If you see a feminine male, like either again like we're making fun of them, or they're like a Square Enix villain. You know, it's not. We don't see it as they're not serious characters. They're not a complex dude. They exist for us to defeat or for us to make fun of. Another thing is the stories of the male characters. So think about different stories of male characters, like classic stories. So like Mario and Zelda, we see those like, okay, some girl gets captured, some shit happens to her, and we have to save her. And those were like the beginning, but you see that trope over and over and over again. They have to answer the call, and the call is some woman. It's always some woman. Some shit happened with her, or she needs help doing something. And I'm not going to go into like, oh my god, she needs to be rescued, you know, all that, feminism, all that. Not that. What I want to see is more relationships between male characters, like just friendships, just male friends hanging out. Like all you dudes, you have dude friends, right? You hang out with them all the time. Sometimes you're really dumb. Sometimes you like get high and you eat pizza. Sometimes you like split your chin open because you were like really dumb and trying to skateboard after getting high and eating pizza. Whatever. Like I'm not saying that can make a game, but like I want that to be emulated in male relationships. You know, you don't see that anymore. It's always like the determined male, or like, oh, I guess I have to work with you, but I'm an old soldier and you're just a green boy. Like I guess we'll be friends. So, you know, there needs to be more of that. And I just wanted to say, like, men are complex, and we're not seeing complex male characters, or at least not very often. Like, I'm sure you guys know of some good games with complex male characters, and please come and tell me about them after I finish, because I would love to hear about them. But, you know, we don't see it very often. The men are angry. They're angry because someone wronged them, or someone wronged someone that they care about, and all they know is anger and rage, and all they want is revenge. And I can only think of one game where I saw a male character cry, and it was because of a woman, and she got trapped or whatever. But like, does anyone have another example of like a male character crying in a video game?
Infamous 2.
Which one?
Infamous 2 had a good one.
Infamous 2. Okay, I'm gonna remember that.
Yeah.
But you see, there's not very many examples. Like, dudes should be able to cry. Like, why can't they do that? Like, and even if they can't cry, like, why can't they be sad? If something happens to a character that they love, why do they have to like stand up and be like, I'm gonna fuck every one of those guys so hard. I'm gonna like blow them to shit. Like, yes, of course you're gonna get to the rage part, but like, why can't they be like sad? Why can't they grieve, you know, over this character? Like, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the intro to The Last of Us, but there's this scene where the character is grieving, you know, over another character who died, and it's super emotional, and I want to see more of that. And maybe we can have that between two male characters. Like, there's no reason that it has to be over a woman. Why, you know, there's no reason that men have to be only emotional over either a woman that they care about or because someone wronged them. So I think that we're put into this like small box because publishers are afraid to fund games that are complex or that have something different than we're used to. So my solution to fix this, and I'm sure you guys, a lot of you are already doing this, is just make complex male characters. Give them feelings other than anger and hate. Make them smile. That would be a huge thing. I would love to see more male characters laughing and smiling and joking, not like Horatio in CSI where he does a one-liner and then he puts on his sunglasses, but like actually joking and laughing and like being happy. Like make happy male characters, you know? Make happy male characters that are also masculine, because sometimes we see them and they're, you know, they're like fruity and they're supposed to be made fun of because they're flamboyant and gay. And, you know, I don't think we should do that. So make stories with male friendship and male camaraderie, and it can be homoerotic or it cannot, either one. But just like male friendship, I mean, we need more of that. And okay, make games with masculine women, make games with feminine men, and make us empathize with those characters. Make us understand those characters and relate to those characters. And if you don't make those games, buy those games. Buy those games so that publishers can see that they're in demand and that they can sell. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Jenn Frank. I am a video games journalist. I write about games and the people who make them. I have written professionally about video games for 9 years. 14 years ago, a dean at Cornell University told me digital humanities is not a real major. 9 years ago, there was no line for a stall in the women's restroom here. 8 years ago, I used to work for a video game website and sleep under my desk. Sometimes I want to quit. I still want to quit sometimes. 6 years ago, I assumed one of many empty seats at the IGF Awards, and it blew my mind. For the first time in my life, I became really invested in other people's hopes and dreams and aspirations. There's nothing more important in the world than other people's hopes and dreams and aspirations. 6 years ago, lost levels would not have been possible. 5 years ago, lost levels would not have been possible. 4 years ago, lost levels would not have been possible. This is the truth. At this moment, you are in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The hardest thing in the world is to be present. Thank you, despite every obstacle, for being present. Don't stop doing you. Become what you love. You are ripe. Your time is now. It's peanut butter jelly time.
Space for people who just want to make games as a hobby, pre-professional. And the way I've been talking about this is that when somebody wants to pick up a basketball, it's not to join the NBA. When someone takes voice lessons, it's not to become Lady Gaga. When someone picks up a guitar for the first time, it's not to try to play on a stage as a huge pop star. It's because they want to learn to play music. And so my emphasis has been to try to point out all these stories that we don't usually see, where yes, Rovio, Angry Birds is some ways a simple game, and in other ways their 53rd game that they produced. That Notch has been working on games since he was 8 years old, and for a long time before he was professional, it was something he did because he loved it. And I'm trying to create more space for people to recognize that if your games don't go commercial, that's fine. You didn't fail at it any more than somebody who wants to take dance lessons, karate lessons, play baseball on a team, didn't fail at it but not becoming professional. It's still a worthwhile activity. It's still enriching. It's still a great way to learn new skills, to meet new people. And so I'm trying to create more of a, like I said, a recognition of that space where the goal isn't always commercial. And in fact, in many cases, I've been interviewing people who do a commercially, AAA or indie alike, who still make the decision sometimes to make non-commercial games, like Colin Northway, who's over here, made Shader just as a demonstration of the fact that, like, even though he's made now well-selling games, there's sometimes reasons where you don't want to design something and then also go through the marketing cycle and figure out if there's a demographic niche for it, and if this fits the current payment schemes, and where to stick the ads on it, or how to get Steam placement. Instead, it's like something where, another guy interviewed, I think it was Matt, what's the Gilgenbach, proposed to his wife with a game. Like, you're not going to commercialize that. And so I've now helped a whole bunch of different students. I'm always trying to find ways to help more people who aren't just students, people in different areas of their life, different times in their lives, how to structure projects that are zero budget, that can be fit around the rest of their life schedule, the rest of their day job, the rest of their work, the rest of their family commitments, that are multi-month, that aren't just a 72-hour game jam, which is nothing wrong with game jams, but it's a very different discipline than having a multi-month teamwork project where you can kind of iterate on it, sit on it, think about it, experience some films, go back to your life, try some of the things, come back to it, and keep feeding back into the game. And so like I said, I just want to help more people do that all over the place. If you have any questions about how to do that better, I want to help answer them. One of my emphases is that no question I think is too naive that we should disregard it. Lots and lots of people out there are stuck with questions that they try to ask other people and they get dismissed. And they're like, that's a crazy question, that's a silly question. And I think that, no, in fact, because of the internet, we should answer every question they have for us. And if there's either a good answer we can point them to, or 8,000 other people have the exact same question, for God's sake, sit down, take the time to write it, not just for that person, but for everybody else who's wondering the exact same thing. Because somebody thinks it seems obvious maybe to someone who's already in that position. For everybody else, like that's what's holding them back, that no one actually explained how to use a terminal, and that sometimes for certain programming tools, that's useful to know. In addition to this, of course, it opens up the increased options for the kind of games we design. So one of the things I studied when I was in academia, which I'm now on my way back out of, is the way that various economic models influence the styles of games that get designed. So people have been very aware of this more recently with free-to-play, with things like in-app purchases, with things like Facebook games. So certain games get favored in that space. That's always been true. My brother and I grew up playing Marble Madness and Bubble Bobble, co-op games on Nintendo Entertainment System. They were co-op because they were clones of arcade games, that because in the early 80s it was more difficult to generate the coins, so they decided that co-op games in the same space ate twice as many quarters for the same machine. That's why those games existed. Those 4-player games we all loved with X-Men and with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and The Simpsons, with 4 players walking to the right vehicle of everyone in the streets that are relatively easy games. Again, more quarter draw for a 4-player machine. Those things have always been about that, and they always will be. In the $60 retail experience, Warren Robin interviewed about his work with Adventure, one of the first games, of course, like the same genre as Zelda, pre-Zelda. He was finding if there's a niche, when someone buys a retail product, it needs to be something bigger than the arcade, otherwise they're going to rent it and then not buy it. And so suddenly longer games started to make sense for that experience. And meanwhile, we have like a subscription model where it's only important that they buy it, that they start playing it, and then they don't leave playing it, and then suddenly that's what makes sense for those. And so when you're doing a free game, you don't have to consider any of that. You're free to make anything you want, independent of if it's still the pacing that would apply, independent of if it only really made sense in the late 80s, if it only really made sense in the right 90s. One of the things I picked up on too is the way we use art as clues for what kind of history we're pointing to, because people realize that, yeah, we use pixel art because we're lazy, we use pixel art because we're not trained artists, we use pixel art because it's fast. Also, it's a clue that when you play a certain game, this is kind of like put yourself in a mindset of Commodore 64. Put yourself in a mindset of like this is an arcade game. It's an instrument we have to point players to like, don't treat this like a PlayStation 2 game. That's not the kind of thing we're going for. And so to pay more attention to how we can offer clues to people playing our free games, what sort of maybe even non-free traditions we're trying to build them into. Maybe that market's dead, maybe it's not, doesn't really matter. When you make it for yourself, the fulfillment comes from, I completed this project I'm proud of, I helped it evolve and increase some other people's skills. Maybe the next time, it'll lead a project I can be a part of and then dabble in some of these skills of my own at a non-professional level. I think it's worth doing, want more people doing it. That's my deal.
Hi, I'm George. I just decided to do this whilst you were speaking there, so this is not my talk prepared. Also, feel free to heckle, because that's the kind of talk I want to give. Thanks. So I want to talk about like working sustainably. Like, so something I try to kind of live by and kind of use as a guide for how I should be living and working is I want to be working and living in a way that I could still be doing, working and living in the same way in 10 years' time without burning out or wanting to give up or dying. And like that's something I definitely tried to live by in terms of I was talking to somebody earlier and he was talking about how he wanted to stay hungry and wanted to kind of work hard and kind of burn out and then kind of break off. And I just want to, yeah, that's basically what I want to do. And there's kind of some techniques that I found working more or less as maybe as I am now that I found useful. Like, so the most important thing I've done for myself is I've said when it comes to 6 p.m. after that time, I don't feel guilty if I'm not working. Like anytime like after that, then I could be working, sure. But if there's work to be done after that, then that's I'm just decided to do that, and I have no obligation to it. And that, I feel like that's really important in terms of keeping a separation between times you're supposed to be working and times you're not. And that works both ways. Like it works both in terms of keeping some time when you're not thinking about that stuff, or you can be doing whatever else, and keeping some time when you do feel guilty when you're not working. And because you have that delineated space, you're like, fine, yes, okay, it is 11 o'clock. I do need to do some work now. Fuck. Whereas if it kind of leaks out, you're like, I can do it later. You can't do it later because you've got to finish by 6. So I find that's really important, and similarly, just working on projects and not being super stressed out. Like I've been more stressed out recently because I've been involved in Wild Rumpus, so I don't know what counts as work anymore. That's something that's plaguing me now. What counts as work and what isn't work? Like, I don't know. Like, if I'm planning Wild Rumpus, does that count as work? Does it count as work if you're being paid for it? Does it count as work if you're preparing a talk you're giving at a conference? I don't know whether that counts as work. Previously it didn't. Previously I had a day job, so all of this stuff is stuff that had to come outside of that, or maybe you're sending an email in the middle of the work day, but you feel naughty about that, and you know that that's not where that belongs. So that's something I'm kind of grappling with now, and I guess everything should count as work. But then you've got to be careful about what projects you take on, and that's hard. That's hard and something I'm not particularly good at. Any other tips? Does anyone else have any other tips for working sustainably? Getting sleep. Yeah, I'm actually really good at sleep. Sleep is something I'm good at. Yeah, like that's super important. Sleeping and eating and exercise, like that's super important. Like my number one tip for GDC is to fucking eat. Just remember to eat, go get lunches, carry your cereal bars around, so that if you're like, oh fuck, I actually really need to go somewhere, you can just eat some cereal bars, you can do something. So you can say, listen to your body. Listen to your body, yeah, listen to your body. And also, like, I mean, Alex gave a really great talk about kind of mindfulness there. That's something I'm not great at. I'm not great at kind of feeling when I'm exhausted, I need to give up and feeling like that kind of stuff. And that's actually kind of a benefit sometimes because you can ignore it and you're like, yeah, fuck. And then you're like, oh no, I felt really shitty, I shouldn't be doing that. That's not kind of good. But it's better long term to listen to your body. It's fucking hard work to listen to that and to be mindful and stuff. That's something that's, I'm again, actually kind of rubbish at, but it's super important. Anything else?
You have to do things that have nothing to do with game development or anything involving games. They're totally different.
Oh yeah, that's super important.
Outside stimulus to incorporate in your, to give you fresh ideas.
Yeah, I mean, not even, whatever about fresh ideas, I don't really care about that. But it is super important to have that kind of diversity of things. Like, I went through a period of time where I was kind of talking to people who weren't from games, and I was like, shit, can I remember how to do this? I've not practiced at this for a while. Like, and like being part of like, I don't know, like a just community of people other than games, other than this, other than just kind of narrow interests, and reminding yourself that like what people are like. That's super important. And also, yeah. Anyone else?
About how it was, trying to actually figure that. It's one thing to say, okay, from now on, 6 o'clock is the end of my work
right,
time.
so like with that, it's not an arbitrary deadline I have to stop working. It's a time that before that, if I'm not working, I have to feel a bit guilty about it, right? And after that time, I feel a bit guilty from working. Sometimes it's looking, you want to get some shit done, and I get stuff done in the evening, and it feels great. And it's a treat to myself that I'm working. I'm like, yeah, shit, I got this thing done, oh, I got this whole thing finished, oh, I shouldn't have worked so late, but, I feel good about that definitely. I think it's just that sense of when you feel like you should be working, or the responsibilities you have to yourself, and setting a routine for yourself and setting expectations for yourself, versus having it as a hard rule. If a hard rule works better for you, then a hard rule works better for you. It's about feeling something out. It works best for you. Any last tips?
Play some games. Don't die.
Working reward method. I always reward myself at the end of the day with something like watching a TV show that I wanted to watch, or playing a game that I banned myself from playing that day.
Like Agent Cooper says, every day give yourself a little present.
I'm not here to talk about something I know. I'm here to ask you guys a question. I want to ask you, should we unionize?
this an idea that's worth pursuing? And our friends in Europe, what is it like, what you're doing there? Please feel free to just come and talk with me. What do you do for a living? How do you keep going? What do you do? What do you do when there's nothing left to do? Like, how do we keep this thing going where it's at without having to sacrifice those things that we're trying to make? When does your, what? Yeah, like, come in. What do we do? I don't know. Do we unionize? Co-ops. Co-ops. Let's talk about co-ops. Do you have to pay to be in a co-op? Can you get funding? Where do you get funding from? How do you keep your life going and making these things that we care about?
Freelance work.
Freelance work. Wearing like different hats, doing different things.
Corporate whoring.
Corporate whoring, yeah. But what do we do when there's
embezzlement?
Throw out the boss and seize the means of production.
Is that can we do that legally?
That's not the point.
Well,
the boss made the laws.
Why should we unionize?
I don't know.
Why shouldn't we unionize?
Lots of other industries do, and so you can kind of look to them as an example. But I guess in games with more people going independent these days, maybe it's less of a thing. And if you did have a union, it could make things harder for smaller companies to employ people to get more legislation around it.
What? I didn't hear any of that.
Sorry.
Unions are expensive for small companies, I think is what you suggest.
Okay.
I don't know anything about the world of unions or anything, but I'm just interested in how we can help each other kind of continue to work and find revenue streams or some way of support, like a support network where we don't have to fucking worry about like getting hit by a train. And like I have a friend back in New York, she got hit by a train, she's a comedian. The community came out just to support her. But if there was like a system in place where she could take care of herself and through the community, I don't know. These are just things I like to think about, and if you have any ideas, please come and find me, and I'd love to talk to you. I think that's it.